I guess really to set things off, I wanted to set the scene and get Tori, maybe you, if you want to give a little bit more of an introduction to yourself, feel free to, but to really just sort of explain the types of investment opportunities we're talking about today and what is an exit.
Yeah, sure. Well, kia ora tātou, ko Tori McNo tōku ingoa, me te mana whenua rangitāne o Manawa tū, tēnā koutou. So kia ora everyone, my name is Tori, such a pleasure to be here. I think to put things simply and to keep things in a simple context, I would say that investment opportunities are really just an opportunity for investors or people with money and resources to be able to give to an idea to help it make greater impact. And I think as part of that investment, the goal is obviously to grow the idea to make bigger impacts over time. There are different stages and different ways that people might enter into that, and I think all of us here probably have a little bit of a different angle and a different time in which we might enter into helping an idea to create impact. And then I guess an exit, it refers to exactly what it says. It's an exit. Again, there's different times and stages that people might exit for, say for an investor or an early stage investor that might look a little bit different to the founder. But some examples of exits are things like when startups get acquired by big companies, or when larger, more later stage investment funds might buy into an idea, and some of us earlier stage funds might exit that idea. And there's different types of risk associated with that as well. Is that a good overview? Hopefully that makes sense.
I think so, yeah. Cool. Hopefully everyone understood that. So, MJ, now we know what we're talking about. Why should people in the audience care? Why is this good for New Zealand and for the agri sector?
Well, a few things. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Kyla gave a very lengthy explanation of who I am. But one of the interesting things about my career is about I started as a founder in the biotech / agritech sector. So I experienced firsthand what it was like to take something off the ground with university research as well, which kind of brings another complexity layer when we're thinking about the growth and exit opportunity. And now as an investor, the pathway and why should we care? There are a few layers to consider. One, I'm preaching to the choir, but productivity and enhancing the brand of New Zealand is one of the things that we should be thinking of. So when we're looking at opportunities with exponential growth and venture-backable returns, what we're thinking about is who else can it serve beyond the New Zealand market. So it's the lens about benefit for New Zealand, but also benefit beyond that. The second part is why should we care? Job creation, not only in-house, so again, preaching to the choir, the people that we're training and the people that we're upskilling in our CRIs, in our universities, in the private sector, but also attracting that talent from overseas to New Zealand to grow productivity and enhance capability from here. And then thirdly, because our innovation ecosystem starts in academia, and that's one of the things that we need to intertwine industry experience or private sector experience with what academia and what the R&D incentives are looking like for productivity when we're thinking beyond the 2030 kind of time frame, but 2050 and way over that. So those are the things at pressing. I think that it's additional to say, because we should just really care about the climate and about the environment and about the planet that we're building and the planet that we're leaving for like future generations to come, which kind of rounds the ethos beyond the venture return, which is around a 10-year horizon. There's still going to be a planet and there's still going to be a company way after that. And kind of to Tori's point of view, it's how do we create generational wealth from primary industries and from the food and fiber sector that don't only considers what are the practices that we're using today and how threatened those might be, but also how do we enhance capability with the use of technology.
Totally, and we'll touch on a few more of those points as we go as well. So Dean, VidAoX Ventures obviously invests internationally. Where do you see some of New Zealand's strengths in technology development and I guess some of the challenges as well?
Yeah, so VidAoX is active investor, US and Israel and New Zealand, and the reason why we're in those geographies, mostly concentrated in California, is because of the agricultural output of those regions and the high level of R&D that goes on in them. So coming from New Zealand, small country, but going into those international markets, both for investment and for customers, what you can do if you're related to Agritech in New Zealand is you turn up with credibility straight away. So it's quite believable that you are representing a startup that has discovered something and is commercialising something that is potentially disruptive to markets around the world. And the fact you're from New Zealand, New Zealand's well known. Some of our companies are well known. Of course, there's Fonterra. These open doors. The challenge that we have is we can invent or discover, invent, prototype and test. We then have to commercialise into international markets, and from that point of view we're at a disadvantage from a company that starts in the US or starts in Europe, starts closer to its market. So that takes time and money. So a lot of our time with early stage companies is about trying to accelerate that process, people getting on planes and spending time in international markets.
Can I?
Yeah.
Because I think one thing that I would like to touch on that, it's also how do we, as investors, touch on the business models that need to be created to achieve those opportunities. I'm keen to hear your thoughts on how do we competitively kind of create those business models when we're not in the market that we're selling to.
That's a great question. I think the short answer is you can't. You have to. You have to get there, and I think one of the aspects, and we see it through Sprout Agritech's early pipeline, and WNT and universities will see it as well, is there's something that goes on in agriculture with its productivity gain every year. Agriculture is one of the few industries in New Zealand that every year is productive year on year on year. It rewards iterations of technology. You can start a business on iterations of technology. And what we see is companies coming through and seeking investment and not having a real understanding of the value of that investment or the value to a larger market. So one of our big lessons and what we see changing in the entrepreneurial pipeline in New Zealand is founders who have much higher levels of ambition about the markets and where they want to go and impact, and that's a long-winded way to business models that can support the investment that is required to do the product build.
Because that's traditionally been a critique of the sector as well, isn't it? That the outcome sizes aren't as big and investing is far harder as a result.
Yeah.
Where else do you think Agritech's harder than, typing some code and hitting copy-paste?
Well, oftentimes that comes for like the level of scale that it's needed, because when you're talking about kind of building some code, what you need is a space like this with just more people on computers. So you can achieve that, and remote work also allows to create those business models from anywhere. Geographically, where your position is not a big of a thing, because your market is everywhere else. I think that in the agri-tech sector from New Zealand, we also need to think that if you're really creating a venture return opportunity, so by that I'm talking about 20, 30 times the return on investment at the very beginning. I think that New Zealand has very clear expectations that also the market is not here. So from day one, no matter what industry you're kind of venturing in, you're unlikely to sell just to the 5 million people that are here. So I think that we need to get over that barrier, or seen as like an impediment that you need to get on planes. We do that for everything else. And even demonstration, we can do that much easier here. I think that Agritech and the health sector are two areas where we can actually do pilot plans and like triage quite quickly. So to Dean's point, that's massively an advantage when you go to the world and actually move the flag from New Zealand and you have something in-house already working. That what plays as a disadvantage could be when your market is not already involved, because you go to the US or you go to Australia or you go to anywhere else, and the first question is like, well, is anyone in New Zealand actually using this? So if you need to get like early traction or early partners here, that is a massive advantage when you go like somewhere else. So I think that that's getting over that barrier, that it's anyway different than any other business.
And your startup, MJ, you started that and ran that in Chile. And would have seen and stay pretty connected to their ecosystem there. How do you see the different governments around the world supporting their agri sectors and innovation coming from that?
That's an interesting question when like we're still in the process of what our science system is going to look like in New Zealand a year from now, and what the innovation and investment space is going to look like a year from now. What I can say from the example in Chile is 20 years ago, the government had the vision, not too dissimilar to what happened here with the first iteration in New Zealand Venture Investment Fund, to create attraction to investment, but also acceleration. So they're a replica of the Tech Incubator program, if you wish, and like a few accelerators with Startup Chile. And that was a big call to the world to say we will support startups, not only do it here, but also come and set up other countries' startups in here. Fast forward to now, that is a massively successful kind of program, the most competitive in Latin America. A lot of other countries are based their innovation ecosystem on that. Now there's a separate branch focusing just on science investments. I'm part of that committee, and I'm really proud to be supporting my country on that. And it's super interesting to see that how the initial massive capital injection to just try and fail with ideas creates a few years from now, every quarter we're deploying close to between 100 to 200 US million just for people to develop that TRL 3 to 5. And then the private sector comes on. As a result of that, more other international venture capital funds have come and located themselves in Chile. There are tax incentives, there are facilities to hire people, there are facilities to scale. So I think, but the other part is the grants and the early stage innovation funding that I think there's certainly some support here as FFF and the work that MPI is doing. But I think it's balancing the good for New Zealand versus venture scalable that kind of still needs to be worked on.
Yep. Tori, Dean, what would you change or keep or?
I have some interesting thoughts on, I guess, government capacity to be able to encourage what it is that we do. And I find it super interesting having this kōrero or the conversation that when we talk about what's happening all across the world, and we miss some of the potential that actually can come out of our own context. And one of the things that I keep running into a lot at the moment is the country's capacity for risk is quite low. We seem to be quite comfortable doing the same thing over and over again, and not really wanting to move until someone from an entrepreneurial perspective or an innovation perspective starts to force that shift. And in addition to that, I think there are some things that we can actually begin to regulate to unlock some of the, particularly mātauranga Māori, that can't be exercised at the moment. One of those things, I believe, would change a lot of our capacity to be able to innovate and iterate on our lands here is the way that the banks allow, for example, lending against Māori land. And it's seen as a risk for us to, I guess, engage in that conversation because Māori land often has multiple owners. The question that I have is that we've never asked ourselves whether that's a real risk or if it's a perceived risk. And it comes from a very historical, I guess, legal background that is hanging over to today. And we haven't, I don't think we've validated whether that risk is true or not. And I do see a big role for the government and in particular the Reserve Bank to really question that and start to consider if we unlocked some of this land and we allowed, I guess, mātauranga Māori to continue to be innovated on that land with we're not asking for anything more or different. We're just asking to be able to use our own land and borrow against it like everyone else. What else could this country do that puts them on the map from a uniquely Aotearoa perspective?
Yep, totally. Dean, any thoughts?
Definitely.
Kia ora.
Unfortunately, Byron, I'm old enough to be around when there was nothing going on. And I can remember there was no startups, there were no funds, there was no encouragement. And so I think, I can look back at that and I think we're fortunate in New Zealand that we do have the infrastructure that we have, and I agree that could be scaled. My number one, if magic wand, would be do great science and make our science groups supported and large enough that they can generate people and ideas over and over and over again, position them globally. We have to, and that's a selfish interest from an investor. We have to invest against world-class science. It's the team is the most important aspect, but world-class science takes us a long way.
Yeah. Can't agree more. Tori, you always look at investments from sort of what's best for the land is best for New Zealand, particularly on-farm technologies. Can you talk a bit about sort of mātauranga Māori and land stewardship and how that can be intertwined with the sort of venture capital and the investments we make?
Yeah, I do think typically coming from a space of mātauranga Māori for me at the moment is geared to, I I guess, thinking about the Māori economy at large. And one of the benefits I think that we miss a lot is even in this context of recession, we have a $90 billion economy, estimated to be, growing faster than the mainstream economy and continuing to do that growth regardless of the current global context. And that's not just something that is exercised within Aotearoa. It's, we have fingers and pies all over the globe. And so I think one of the ways that you can look to exercise that way of thought is by engaging with the modes of business that are conducted from an ao Māori perspective. And typically, I would really encourage everyone to go and look up kumara economics. There's a couple of rangatira in the sector who talk about it, in particular Tipu Hokatini from Tapu Wairoa talks about this a lot. And it's kind of based on this whakatauki, or this proverb that talks about the kumara's value is really only in its ability to be able to feed people. So it's only good to have kumara if it can feed people. And so how does that change your outlook on the money that you're creating or the money that you're investing in and the things that you need to return? And I think that comes into the way that we might exercise kaitiakitanga over our land, and the ways that we might exercise that. And again, that kind of brings up that conversation around, you have multiple beneficiaries and owners of these lands. And so I do really think if there's one thing that people can take away, that there's a lot to learn from the Māori economy and the way that it looks at wellbeing as a whole. And I don't think it's dissimilar across the sector. I do think there are a lot of farmers here, Māori, Tauiwi, Pākehā, all alike, who have an intimate relationship with the land and could actually connect with those modes of economic well-being a little bit more.
Yeah,
I think, for me, that's... I know it's like slightly adjacent to the question,
No.
but I think it's a really important thing to touch on.
Yeah. Probably MJ and Dean specifically, keen to hear some examples of some of those technologies from New Zealand that the audience might not have heard of. We've obviously got Biolumic as a real local example, but maybe a couple of your portfolio companies where they're really working in the ag sector and pushing things forward.
I can just give a shout to Robotics Plus, because I think that when we talk about agri sector, they're probably one of the biggest companies that we've had. It's a massive success story, and we don't talk about them enough. What they're doing, it's like autonomous robotic vehicles, fruit pickers, and things that really enhance. So they're not in farm per se, but they're supporting and enhancing productivity of farming. And when I think about technologies that really help the support, we have precision fermentation coming to the place, things like Biolumic, things like Robotics Plus. The site that they're building around Tauranga, it's going to employ and it's going to attract so many people. Yeah. But that is an overnight success story of the last 25 years. So when we think about what scale needs to look like, that's a clear example of a world-class company being built in regional New Zealand as well, which is something that we continuously say that can be done, attracting international kind of funds, employing a lot of people, being used as a case study across the world in their innovation. So how do we get more of those overnight success stories? Like, I'm excited. There's a lot of opportunities here in the Manawatu region as well. I think food and fiber, it's becoming very relevant in terms of when we're thinking about how do we feed the planet. And some of the things that I'm the most excited about are innovations that are intertwined with farmer capability and knowledge to use science as a backbone of how do we enhance and accelerate, but also that waste to value piece when we're thinking about continuous farming practices and all the discard process that are being generated. There are so many opportunities from New Zealand taking that in a circular process or taking that to other valuable products. So that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah.
Well, I think MJ raises some great points. These companies take a while. You can have them in regional New Zealand. You can hold them and grow them and scale them over regional New Zealand, but it doesn't just happen. Yeah. You actually have to support them. So Biolumic, coming out of Massey University, 40-odd staff based in Palmerston North, offices in Boston. It's not overnight. It's a great call out. A little plug for Sentient Bios, one of the ones that we've recently invested in. This is R&D that came out of plant and food research, figuring out how to use an insect's odorant receptor to detect volatile organic compounds. Smart people figured out how to synthetically make insects' odorant receptors. and now we're in the process of manufacturing odorant receptors and placing them onto diagnostic devices for a multitude of different industries, from the flavours and fragrance industries to the containers moving food around the world and detecting spoilage and so on. So, again, another piece of technology that had some 10 years of research has been in the commercialisation phase for 3 or 4 years now, and has another half dozen, 10 years to go in front of it before it's going to reach the stage that everyone's going to be proud of.
And the one thing I think there to kind of mention as well is that all of these success stories now, like if you start mapping who they've gotten funding from, it's just such a convoluted list of people. Yeah. So a lot of it comes from like an initial university project, some initial like SFFF or MPI or return on science, then that led to another mentor, that led to another committee, and then you got some seed funding, then that funder connected you with someone offshore, you took a meeting, that didn't work, you're back to the drawing board, you had to do a down round at some point. So all of this journey that we only see the headlines of like company X raises X amount. Like you're not getting to experience all the groundwork that goes behind the scenes and all the frustrations and all the like uphill battles that this we only showcase in the highlight reel. So don't get like dissuaded with that. If you're really focusing on like a problem market fit, that's part of the journey. The destination is the money, but the journey is like building the company. That's what the focus should be like. And then there's a lot of government support for early stage opportunities. I think there's a lot more work to do for that scale up capability, so we can actually keep more in New Zealand. I'm talking about infrastructure. Like spaces where people can come and iterate and pivot, like Food HQ, for example, is doing a lot of really cool things there. We have the football in Auckland, but how do we do that at scale? How do we do that with like people that can access them easier and actually for people to be aware of? That's the challenge that I would like kind of this community get together and really prompt that conversation.
Because I think that ties into probably our final question, looking at the clock here, but we heard from a few quite innovative companies this morning, and they highlighted capital's a big problem, and I don't think any of us on the stage can just magic up more capital, but there's a lot that comes with engaging with VC funds, and I think we could probably do better as an industry around like highlighting those pathways to capital and doing better to get people on the right track faster, so that it's not such a convoluted pathway. Is that something you guys work on internally?
Yeah, well, a few of the people that I've talked and are talking to are in our portfolio, so we're really proud to be supporting a lot of innovative companies and like the team and the science, it's the backbone. Like we are a generalist fund, so we can invest across many sectors. I do think that one big gap is direct to consumer. So for food innovations in New Zealand, there's just not enough funding. There are more funds looking at brand plays. So if you're thinking about what the marketing and the kind of innovation sector needs to look there, I think there's a bigger opportunity, which hopefully is prompting kind of some more funding to come from here. But what we can do is like in our case, and I think Sprout and Finisterre comes like after that, but we're in that 0 to 1 piece. So it's working with the companies that we're investing in to get you to the best position that we can, so then we can showcase you to the world. And I think that that's kind of like the responsibility that we have.
Yeah, I think we're in that like -1 to 0 phase. Particularly from like what we're trying to build is a better understanding and capacity from an Māori perspective for people like me to be able to both sit on investment committees and participate in this space, but also for Māori innovators to be seen as legitimate and valid when they enter these spaces. And one of the things that we're talking about before is the science that sits behind things, the knowledge that sits behind things. One of the beautiful things I think the agri sector at large, and while this is not my, expertise, the whenua in the land has been the expertise of my whakapapa for a very long time. I guess one of the cool things that I see here is that a lot of our science and the knowledge that we gather is actually done not in a lab. And so the responsibilities of places like a university or a Crown Research Institute to back up and engage with you, whoever you are, because you have that knowledge and intimate connection to your land and what you're doing and the animals that you might be looking after or the crops that you harvest, for us anyway, I do believe that there's a bigger and better capacity for our sector to get more comfortable with how science looks long term, and that it's not always going to be in the institutions to date that we have seen it. take place in. And so I just encourage you to keep knocking on those doors and coming back to us with the knowledge that you do have, because unless we know what's actually going on at the ground level, we can't help. Yeah, this is a challenge for us, I think.
Perfect. All right, well, that's time for us. Thanks a lot for listening in, and yeah, come talk to us all. We're all here for the rest of the day, so look forward to talking to you.